Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, and Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films: Crawl, The Spy Behind Home Plate, and the new motto for Films in Focus, I do not care if we go down in history as barbarians. Hi, David. What do you have to say to that?
Well, you'll find out in a moment. Because I'd like to start with a movie which is way more available. That last film will be not in every multiplex, but Crawl sort of is in a whole lot of multiplexes. And Crawl kind of, the word started spreading about it, within the past 2-3 weeks. It was not screened in advance for critics, and usually studios and distribution companies and stuff do that when they don't think their movie's any good. Or at least when they don't think their movie is going to get good reviews, they kind of keep it out of the view of critics until it opens. So word started to circulate that from people who did manage to see Crawl very early on, one way or another, that, hey, this is a good movie. There was no reason to keep this movie hidden away. And so I decided, well, this is definitely something that piques my curiosity. So I went out and I saw Crawl at a movie theater. And I have to say, it's okay, and yeah, I don't really think that the studio needed to keep it hidden. It's, it's perfectly good, but it's not exactly inspired. It's a horror movie, as the title Crawl may suggest, but actually it's not really a horror movie because there's really nothing supernatural about it. It's more of a terror movie. It's about people being really, really scared, or it's what some people nowadays might call an ordeal movie, where you have a main character, in this case two main characters, who are just stuck in some horrible, horrible situation that they have to somehow get through. So I won't give, I hope, any spoilers here, because Crawl is a suspense movie, and you're always wondering what's going to happen and who's going to get out of this alive and stuff like that. But Crawl takes place in Florida, and the very first thing we learn in the movie is that the main character, who is a young woman named Haley, is a swimmer. She's a college swimmer. And so the very first thing we see her doing in the movie is swimming, or doing the crawl. So that's one meaning of the title, Crawl. And she's a really good swimmer, and she's always trying to be a better swimmer, and she remembers her father, who was her coach, and how he always told her, you can do it, you can do it, and she then went beyond what she thought she could do, etc. The second thing we find out in the movie is that there is a horrible hurricane raging down near this Florida college where Haley is a swimmer. A really, really major hurricane, and the winds are blowing and the rain is coming down, and it's really, really bad. And she and her sister, with whom she doesn't get along very well, and they have conversations by cell phone, are worried about their father because they haven't heard from him for a while. So Haley decides that she's going to brave the storm, brave the hurricane, and she's going to go see if she can find her father. So this is all the very beginning of this movie. So these are not spoilers. She goes to his condo, and no, he's not there, and the dog's not there. So that's, he must have gone away somewhere because he took the dog. And then she goes to the house in which he no longer lives to see if he's there. And that is where most of the movie takes place. And down in the basement of the house, and I will give this much away, she does find her father. This is still very early in the movie. His name is Dave. And he's down there, but he's injured, and he can't get out. So now we have Haley and her father in the basement of this house, which is basically a crawl space. So there's another meaning of the title. And yes, they have to do a lot of crawling around down there. And guess who the other main characters of this movie are? Alligators. So that's what this movie is about. It is about these two human beings and these alligators, and not all of it, but most of it takes place in that basement. Now, this film, Crawl, reminded me of no movie more than Jaws, that great old classic of the 1970s by Steven Spielberg. And in fact, I would describe Crawl as a kind of low-rent Jaws set in a basement. And instead of one great big shark, we have a handful of really, really, really big alligators. So that is what the movie is about. So Yes, it is suspenseful. Yes, every once in a while you sort of start squirming in your in your seat. Are they going to make it, around the corner of the basement without the alligators getting them and stuff like that? I was not convinced by the logistics of this movie a lot of the time. My goodness. I mean, people's limbs get caught in alligators' mouths, and they always seem to manage to extricate the limbs, and there never seems to be more damage than some torn flesh. And I always think of alligators as things that can snap off people's limbs, anytime they sort of feel like it, as long as they can get a purchase on them. So I was not always convinced by this. And yeah, sometimes the storm outside doesn't look as convincing as it should. But if you want a good, old-fashioned summer scare movie with alligators, then Crawl is the movie for you. If you want a really great horror movie, I would say wait a while longer. It doesn't quite measure up in that department. So the second film I'd like to talk about, Jill, today is entirely different. It is called The Spy Behind Home Plate, and it is a documentary, and it is by my old friend Aviva Kempner, who makes movies about Jewish subjects almost entirely, documentaries on Jewish subjects, and she has a sort of a subspecialty in Jewish baseball movies, because around 11 years ago she made a very good movie called The Life and Times of Hank Greenberg, about a very interesting Jewish Major League Baseball player. So now she comes back again, but this time the story has some extra twists. This is the story of a guy named Mo Berg, who once upon a time was a very, very famous baseball player. He played for a number of major league teams. He was mainly a catcher, and a very, very major one, a very great one. But he was one of those remarkable people who seems to be able to do almost anything. So not only was he a very great Jewish baseball player, but as a young man, he went off to Princeton and then to Columbia, and he mastered any number of languages during his Princeton year. That was his that was his great specialty there. And then he went to Columbia Law School and earned a law degree. And by the time he was earning his law degree, he was already a very Major League Baseball player. So all of this is interesting enough and would probably make an interesting biopic. But something else that happened when he was still pretty young was that as World War II started to come along, he got involved with the Office of Strategic Services of the United States government. That was the forerunner of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and started spying for the Office of Strategic Services, for the OSS. Now, he was able to do this partly because he had really good connections in both Europe and Asia. Before World War II started, obviously, he went off to Japan, where baseball was catching on as a major imported sport. And he and others, including Babe Ruth, went to Japan at one point on a sort of a goodwill mission to teach and instruct and coach young Japanese baseball players and sort of help the spread of the sport, help Japanese baseball become major over there and become really well played. So he developed really good connections through that in Japan, and also he had really good connections in Europe, partly through his baseball activities and also through his tremendous skill with so many different languages. So when World War II broke out, he started spying, and he was not able to obviously just go to Tokyo and do spying there, because after Pearl Harbor, all kinds of things were going on. But at one point, he actually had gone to Tokyo and snuck up to the roof of a hospital by pretending he was going to visit an important patient there, and had taken with a 16mm movie camera a pan shot of Tokyo, which later on became very valuable to the American authorities once World War II was being waged. So anyway, he had a fascinating career in all these different areas, both as a scholar and as a Major League Baseball player, and then later on as a spy, and that is what Aviva Kempner's new movie is about. It's a very, very by-the-numbers documentary. There is nothing original here at all, cinematically, but it just tells this fascinating story about this largely forgotten guy. I guess if you're a great big baseball history fan, you'll remember Mo Berg, but I'm not a great big baseball history fan, so a lot of this really came to me as news, and he was just a fascinating character, and he had an interesting sort of a family life. Neither he nor any of his siblings ever married, but boy, he sure did keep himself busy, and he crossed the paths of a lot of famous people. I'll give away one little bit from the movie. At one point, he was assigned by the OSS to attend a lecture by Werner Heisenberg, the great physicist, Holocaust, when Heisenberg was in Switzerland. And one of Berg's big tasks for the OSS was to find out what kind of progress the Nazis were making with any sort of atomic bomb program. And at one point, Mo Berg attended this lecture by Heisenberg, and according to the movie, and I'm persuaded that this is true, in one pocket he had a gun, a pistol, and in the other pocket he had a cyanide capsule. And if Heisenberg did have all kinds of nuclear secrets and started to give them away in this lecture, Berg was supposed to stand up and kill him and then take the cyanide capsule. It turned out that Heisenberg didn't say any of the magic words, and so this never happened. But what a fascinating just moment in history that was. And there's even an on-camera interview that David Koechner gets with Heisenberg's son, who says, "Oh yes, I'm very glad my father was not assassinated." So anyway, interesting stuff, some very interesting archival footage, all kinds of interesting on-camera interviews. The Spy Behind Home Plate, I really recommend it. If you're interested in baseball or spying or a whole lot of other things, it's a very entertaining documentary. And the last movie today, Jill, is the one with the long title, I Do Not Care If We Go Down in History as Barbarians. And this is an international co-production, but mainly it's a Romanian film, and it's by the great Romanian director Radu Jude. And the title was spoken by a member of the Council of Ministers, I guess the head of the Council of Ministers of Romania in 1941. When Romania was starting a tremendous, horrific, horrifying ethnic cleansing that amounted practically to a genocide on the Eastern Front. And this is, an atrocity perpetrated by Romania back during the World War I years. And what this movie is about, it's a fiction film, but it's very much about this. It's about a young theater director in today's world who wants to stage a reenactment of the Odessa massacre. And that was a horrible, horrifying incident in which Romanian soldiers were ordered and did slaughter tens of thousands of Ukrainian Jews. And so we have this modern-day young theater director who wants to reenact this, a great reenactment of this horrifying moment as a way of teaching present-day Romanians about the horrors that their own country, one of their previous governments perpetrated during the World War I years. Now, the World War II years. Not surprisingly, the authorities in present-day Romania are not very happy about this. They know, yes, you want to accomplish something, you want to educate our people, you want to prevent this atrocity that was committed by our country, you want to prevent it from being forgotten, but hey, let's not do something that's too anti-Romanian here. So there's tension, and one of the big themes of the movie is a sort of almost at times a comic tension between this young director and the local official who is in charge of keeping this whole thing within bounds, letting her go ahead and do this tremendous reenactment, but not making it get too, not letting it rile the people up too much or bring back too many unpleasant memories of the anti-Semitism and various other ills that are a part of Romania's history. So that is what the movie is about. It is a very long movie. It's way over 2 hours long, and it is all involved with Romanian history. But I must say, I found it very, very watchable. First of all, it does have a kind of a bitterly comic tone, as this young director has these various long conversations and conflicts, and there's a lot of trading of threats with this local official who is, again, in charge of keeping this whole thing from getting out of hand and keeping it from riling up the populace. But also, the whole idea of staging this big reenactment is quite fascinating. All of the logistics involved. It's a local activity, really, and a whole lot of people are being drafted to be in it and be extras and so forth. And sometimes we have the director walking down a line of people and saying, "You be such and such, and you be so and so, and you pretend to be doing this and that." Just basically based on the way people look and the kind of vibes that the director thinks they might transmit to the audience. And then there's other things about whether or not they can project words on the front of a building and whether the words or pictures would be legible and things like this. So it's an interesting kind of showbiz documentary, or not documentary, but a showbiz kind of recreation in an odd sort of a way too. But mainly this is a very historical film, and whether or not one is specifically interested in the various excesses and evils of Romania way back in those days of the early 1940s, whether or not one is interested in that, this just brings to mind again all of the atrocities and all of the horrors that took place during World War II, during the Holocaust, during the Nazi years, et cetera, this time filtered through this Romanian lens. But again, it's a movie that has much wider resonance. This movie was Romania's entry for the American Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film this past year. It did not make the cut, but Romania thought very highly of it. Radu Juda is a wonderful filmmaker. His last movie, Afarim, is, I think, a real masterpiece. And although this movie is not quite that good, it's a fascinating film. Anybody interested in World War II history and Holocaust history, or in history generally, should definitely look at it. I do not care if we go down in history as barbarians. And so that is my, I hope not particularly barbaric story this week, Jill.
It's still a good motto. Thank you very much, David Sterritt. Films in Focus. The films: Crawl, The Spy Behind Home Plate, and I Do Not Care If We Go Down in History as Barbarians.